The United States' current public education system is floundering. The United States international ranking is now 26th and falling, placing it behind most first-world countries, and students are graduating with a lack of fundamentals acquisition across grade levels and an inability to apply knowledge to real-world situations. Similarly, the widening knowledge gap is contributing to widening socioeconomic gaps, depriving the general population of the mental tools necessary to rise above their current situations. Numerous reforms have been implemented during the 20th and 21st centuries as attempts to fix these problems. The reformists of the early 20th century supported a shift from knowledge to self, implementing a system concerned primarily with the development of character rather than intellect. While this modern emphasis of self-esteem did produce students capable of self-actualization, it did not produce a rise in test scores. National and international scores continued to fall. Ironically, this shift corresponds with a crackdown on standardized test preparation, a federal attempt to raise the United States international education ranking. Rather than reforming the system, these conflicting ideals resulted in an inconsistent education experience. Before this Reformation boom, the classical model dominated education in the United States. Classical education asserts that true education lies in learning to reason and should expose people to the wealth of human knowledge by acquiring languages and reading the works of great thinkers. Because the downward spiral of the United States education system aligns with the implementation of a child-centered modern education system and standardized test focus, a return to intellectual philosophy and the classical model may act as a solution because it develops both intellect and character by supporting natural cognitive development, emphasizing foundational literacy within the scope of general exposure, and teaching systematically. Classical education's support of natural cognitive development shows itself in its adherence to the trivium. Classical education is traditionally divided into 3 stages, with each stage corresponding to an age group. The first stage, grammar, pertains to students from 1st to 4th grade. During this age, children study science, mathematics, English, and history with the priority of mastering reading, writing, and basic mathematics. Critical thinking is not taught during this stage. Instead, teachers encourage students to feast on knowledge and develop an individual passion for learning. It is only in the next 2 stages, logic and rhetoric, that students delve into critical thinking and creative self-expression. Grammar stage children focus on facts and memorization rather than critical thinking because their minds are not yet ready for abstract thinking. Students learn analysis during the logic stage when a child's mind has matured into questioning the reason behind reality. Leaving this skill until children can learn it strengthens students' desire to utilize it. The grammar stage of the trivium devotes itself to filling students' minds with knowledge across subjects: math, science, history, English, art, music, and language. The purpose of the grammar stage is not to master all knowledge. Rather, it provides a basic overview of the main principles in each subject and encourages exploration. Likewise, classical educators do not gloss over subjects often characterized as dull. Students learn the events, dates, and names of the history of the world, the principles of mathematics, and so forth, regardless of its personal appeal. Classical educators believe that no subject is boring. It is the educator who renders learning interesting, and all subjects are worthy of study. Students are also required to demonstrate their knowledge through memorization and drill work. While modern schools do require some memorization, particularly in subjects like history and science, the classical model requires it in abundance. Memorization and drill work perform the multi-purpose of encouraging students to enjoy education, aiding students in measuring their progress, and strengthening students' grasp of classroom material. Class time in the classical model is divided so that instruction and class-wide work use 75% of the school day, allowing students to engage in private pursuits during the other 25%. This free time allows students to recharge between instruction periods and encourages them to take control of their educations by determining how they spend their free time, allowing students to gain the responsibility necessary to take charge of their own educations after graduation. Classical education's grammar stage also promotes success among its students by emphasizing general exposure and foundational literacy within subject material. From the beginning, students study math, science, history, and English in their depth forms. They are not required to become masters in these subjects. Rather, they enjoy overviews that build students' perception of the world. While all information is valuable, the grammar stage places particular emphasis on the development of foundational literacy. Because classical education works to prepare students to become lifelong learners, it is necessary that students become proficient in tools necessary both for knowledge gathering and communication: reading, writing, and basic mathematics. For students to access knowledge, strong ability in reading is a necessity. Basic mathematical skills are also required because their absolute principles govern not only the realms of mathematics, but also science, history, art, music, and so forth. And writing is a necessary skill that allows one to communicate work results and collaborate with others, allowing participation in the advancements taking place across the world. It is through a systematic approach to learning that classical education ensures students study all general subjects, achieve foundational literacy, and enjoy cognitive development support. Classical education spreads out exposure to new subjects by dividing them into sequences of 4 that repeat in each stage of the trivium. For example, science contains many subfields that are equally worthy of attention. To avoid overwhelming students with information, science is divided into a sequence of 4 that repeats in each trivium stage, rather than offering an often overwhelming sampling of each scientific category within a school year. Classical education's systematic approach is also seen in English and history. Classical education seeks to educate students in all general subjects and the interconnection that binds them. To accomplish this, English and history follow the same repeating pattern. As a story of civilization, history is the glue that binds all classical education together. It is necessary, then, that students study history as a chronological story with a beginning and an end, in order for students to grasp both its significance and the significance of developments in other subjects as well, as begin to think critically. Modern education principles assert that interest in history comes from initially teaching students how it relates to them. Because of this, the subject begins with teaching students about the history of their city, their state, and their government. This moves into history of the United States, and the grammar stage would end without touching world history at all. Classical education also endorses systematic learning by incorporating the parts-to-whole method of learning. This model is systematic in its approach to teaching students to read, by using the building blocks of phonics rather than a whole-to-parts method like word recognition. Students equipped with the building blocks and basic rules of the subject can master new content quicker and easier because they are able to intuit how their previously learned rules may apply in new situations. This parts-to-whole method is also relevant in the way students learn Latin. Latin's makeup as a systematic language governed by order and taught in a parts-to-whole method makes it the ideal companion to a classical education. With few exceptions, rules in Latin govern the structure of basic and complex sentences alike, and vocabulary, tenses, and declensions build on each other, making sentences translatable even if they contain new elements. Classical education is systematic in its expectations. Self-expression focus diminishes in favor of first developing the skills to express oneself well. Although grammar school programs often encourage creativity and self-expression among students, classical education denounces this as putting the cart before the horse. Classical education reveres mastering skills in order to perform well. During the grammar stage, students have not acquired many skills, and none of them are mastered. Naturally, there are concerns regarding classical education. Questions arise regarding whether the classical model is conducive to assigning grades and continuing standardized testing. Classical education lends itself to grading systems, although it must be emphasized that grades are not the primary importance in this system. The priority is that students master the skills presented. It stands to reason, though, that standardized test scores will rise if students are better educated. Concerns regarding teacher qualifications are also common. Incorporating the classical model in the American public school system does not require an overhaul of teachers. There is no requirement of holding a degree in classical education before following the classical model. In fact, classical schools prefer hiring individuals with no teaching degree because the classical model values teachers who are masters in their subject areas rather than masters of pedagogy. Perhaps the most common concern is that classical education is an elitist model that only supports the wants of the wealthy and the powerful. However, classical education can be taught to any student regardless of socioeconomic background, race, ethnicity, country of origin, or disabilities. It is an efficient method of training students to be self-learners equipped with the knowledge and skills necessary to participate in adulthood. It requires no money or social standing from students, only a willingness to learn. In light of this, classical education is perhaps the least elite education model available. While implementing the grammar stage of the classical model's trivium in the American public school system is an improvement, it is not the solution. Accumulating knowledge is a wonderful pursuit, but it quickly becomes dangerous if one is ill-equipped to discern truth from fallacy. Success in the school system depends on the grammar stage being treated as what it is, a preparatory state, and continuing the use of the trivium as students progress to their next state of development, the logic stage.